Right, hello and good morning, everybody. Thank you for logging into this webinar on understanding how to deliver net zero houses. Thanks very much. It's one of a series of thought leadership sessions that we are doing and wanting to do. So I've just got a few introductory slides, and then we'll hand over to Catherine and Lucy to do the presentation. So just on to the next slide, which is not coming through. So the agenda today is a quick few slides from me, Mary Bennell, Director of South West Procurement Alliance. And then we've got a talk on Net Zero Carbon Framework and the Policy Playbook from Catherine Adair from UK Green Building Council. And then we've got how to scale up skills and training for builders and contractors from Lucy Pedler at the Green Register. And then Q&A at the end. I'm sure you're all familiar now with the Q&A and the chat functions on Zoom. So please do put your questions in there in either the Q&A or the chat function as we go through. And we'll pick up questions at the end. Probably the best way to do it, although we can pick them up at the end of each session. So just from me, I mean, I think really pleased to be doing this webinar, and really great to have both Lucy and Catherine involved. And I think I was thinking back 18 months when I was talking about doing some talk on Future Home Standard and sort of looking rather gloomily at all the government initiatives around carbon reduction, and felt, there've been so many stops and starts. I do hope that now, with the publication of the 6th carbon budget and the statements in April, that we have a new target to slash emissions by 78% by 2035, that we're really, really going places, because I do think there's 3 key, if you like, areas for us as providers of housing. There's the zero carbon agenda, there's obviously the building safety agenda, and there's the delivering more affordable homes. Those are my 3 top sort of go-to policy areas. But there is so much. How can we do it? There's so many policies and reports at the moment. Excellent reports. Of course, the one on the left, December 2020, policies for the 6th zero carbon budget, all 449 pages of it. But I must say, really brilliant data in there, really interesting. But there are all these things we're having to think about. And in a box on the right, I've just put some of the other excellent reports and practical guidance there is. But what we're going to be doing today is really giving you some delivery advice, some advice on delivery. And just a quick plug for us as South West Procurement Alliance, we have some ways, we have some frameworks, because we're a provider of frameworks that can support you in delivering these key criteria and objectives. So first of all, we have a framework for modular building, offsite construction of new homes. That's been up and running since May 2019 and has some companies on it who have an excellent track record in delivering high-spec zero carbon homes. We are also just launching a dynamic purchasing system, a low carbon modern methods of construction dynamic purchasing system in partnership, in collaboration with a digital toolkit constructing modern methods that has been produced as part of an Innovation UK bid by Bristol Housing Festival and YTKO. So those are 2 things for new build, that we have products for new build that we have to help you. We do also have a big framework for retrofit, which is all about energy efficiency measures and associated works. And we have 21 energy efficiency measures that individual suppliers can deliver through that. They're all there on the screen. And then we have suppliers who can deliver all of them together, or a combination of them on that one. And to help with those works, we also have a consultancy service, energy efficiency consultancy service framework, with 3 excellent consultancy services on it who will carry out the various activities that are outlined on the right there. So that's me, that's the plug for our frameworks. And now onto some very interesting talks. First of all, from Catherine, and I'll stop sharing my screen and hand over to Catherine to get started. Right.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mary. Right, let me just let me know when you can see what I'm doing. That come up?
Yes, that's come up. Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so thanks everyone. It's great to be here today. So I'm Catherine Adair. So I am the UK Green Building Council's local network coordinator from the Southwest, for the Southwest region. So I'm seconded from kind of on a part-time basis from Hawley, who I'm a sustainability consultant there as well. Today I'll just be speaking about UK GBC's work around net zero carbon and our net zero carbon framework. And also specifically about our new homes policy playbook that we launched earlier this year. So in terms of the work that UK GBC has done kind of to date and kind of the resources that are available, we launched the Advancing Net Zero programme back in 2018 to essentially drive the transition to a net zero carbon built environment in the industry. The initial piece of work that's quite well referenced in the industry is the net zero carbon framework definition, which I'll come back to shortly. Other industry guidance documents, which includes a feasibility study focusing on the design, delivery and cost of net zero carbon buildings, including residential. That's been quite well received, and it's been quite useful. Obviously, one of the key things we find with delivering net zero carbon buildings is like kind of the cost perspective and the cost of uplifting to that to that standard. So that particular study looks at an office and a residential, kind of a 18-story residential building, but that study is going to be expanded hopefully over the next year to also cover kind of low and medium rise residential, which should hopefully kind of give some more guidance as to kind of how that can be delivered on the ground. So kind of keep your eyes peeled for when that's kind of piece of work is finished. And then most recently as well, we've kind of have our renewable energy procurement and carbon offsetting piece, which is our kind of most recent piece of work to come out of the programme. Obviously I can't go into all of those today, but they're all available for free on the UK GBC website if any of you guys kind of would like to kind of use any of those. And so there's specifically our framework definition. So that the definition aims to provide clarity on what it means to be net zero carbon and have a net zero carbon building in the UK. It essentially offers kind of an overarching framework of kind of consistent principles and metrics that can be used to guide the transition to net zero carbon in the built environment. And it's really aimed to be used by developers, designers, building owners and occupiers and policymakers to just make sure that everyone and all stakeholders in the industry are kind of working to the same framework and towards the same goal to make it easy to kind of compare and kind of share notes, I suppose, about how everything is progressing. It basically sets out two definitions for net zero carbon. And the approach that should be taken to kind of demonstrate achievement, I suppose, for both of those. So the first part is net zero carbon in construction, which is basically for new buildings and for renovations. And then there's net zero carbon specifically focusing on operational energy, which for kind of essentially is for all buildings in operation. And then we also have, in addition to that kind of work we've done to date, we're currently working on a whole life carbon roadmap, in addition to all those other pieces we're working on in the main Advancing Net Zero programme. That is going to be launched later this year at COP26 conference in Glasgow in November. And essentially what this project will do is bring together stakeholders from across the built environment sector, and is going to consist of two elements really: a science-based trajectory for reducing emissions in line with limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees, and then a report which is going to set out industry kind of actions, recommended government policies, and kind of associated mechanisms for making sure that confirm what is needed to get to net zero carbon from a whole life carbon perspective. So yeah, the roadmap is going to cover the entire building life cycle and include all building types, including infrastructure, rather than just specifically focusing on something like operational construction, which is historically kind of where the kind of focus has been to date in the industry. And critically, this is an industry-led kind of consensus-based approach. So it's being developed in consultation with a wide variety of stakeholders and policymakers, and it's going to be launched with industry. So yeah, again, UKGBC, we kind of we'll be consulting on this when it's kind of out, and really just want kind of everyone's feedback on it when it comes through. But hopefully it's going to be quite a useful kind of roadmap for everyone to use in the industry to kind of make sure we're all going in the right direction. And then I guess what I'm just going to go through in a bit more detail today is our new homes policy playbook. And so kind of most of the guidance I've kind of just highlighted there just now kind of focuses primarily on the kind of technical guidance and feasibility studies on how to deliver net zero carbon buildings. So in addition to that, what we've done and what we have is this resource that we call the New Homes Policy Playbook. And it's basically it's intended to be used by local authorities to inform planning policy. But it's also a helpful tool for kind of other industry stakeholders to kind of understand where policy is heading towards. We've definitely found there's a lot of enthusiasm from local authorities specifically, because kind of in a lot of ways, national policy is behind where the industry is in terms of carbon emissions and kind of sustainability in the built environment. So local authorities are really keen to get their own policy in a place where we can really drive this agenda, and really this playbook is kind of helping them to see what their target should be and kind of where we should be going. So what the playbook has is minimum requirements and stretching requirements. So for each of the kind of different sections, which I'll go through shortly, the minimum requirements are essentially kind of things that all local authorities should introduce now, and should be achievable kind of across the board. And the stretching requirements are for those which kind of local authorities that wish to go further could consider implementing at the next available opportunity. But the key thing is they're still designed to be realistic and achievable, but just go that little bit further. I suppose it's quite important to note that those recommendations are for local authority policy and have been designed to be delivered kind of across the whole of the UK. So what that means is that on a site basis on the ground, some developments might find that they are able to push even beyond the stretching recommendations we're given. It really just depends on the site, but it should just give a kind of baseline understanding for industry and local authorities about what should be achievable and where we should be going. But the playbook's a live document. We're really keen to just have constant kind of feedback on it, and the targets are going to be regularly updated when new evidence becomes available to kind of inform where targets need to be and what recommendations should be improved. So the first section that we have here, so on the next few slides, I'm just really just covering kind of the main recommendations of the report, but I'm, as part of the follow-up, I'm happy to kind of share the full document, which kind of gives a lot more detail on kind of the rationale and kind of more details about how to deliver these. But in terms of the first section about reducing energy demand, our kind of minimum requirement is a reduction of 31% on the dwelling emission rate against the target emission rate using the Part-L methodology. Now, this is now in line with what will be required as part of the kind of interim uplift for the Future Home Standard from 2022. But as also for us, as part of our minimum target, we're also including that there should be a fabric performance. The fabric performance should exceed the notional specification by at least 5%. And then crucially, also the energy use intensity should also be reported, which kind of links to the stretching targets that we're recommending as well. So for the minimum, we think energy use intensity targets should be reported, which kind of it's a bit of a kind of shift away from using the Part-L methodology towards a kind of more focus on energy use and energy reduction rather than specifically only focusing on carbon emissions. So for our stretching target, we have recommended moving completely away from utilising the Part L methodology as a key way of measuring and reducing energy demand. And it said focusing on that energy use intensity, and then for the stretching, including energy use intensity targets, which include regulated and unregulated energy use. So our kind of recommendation is that we would have a total EUI target of 70 to start with, but that should be tightened over time to then eventually achieve a target or kind of a requirement of 35 by 2030. So the next bit we've kind of focused on is reducing embodied carbon. So kind of as a minimum, we think all development should be providing circular economy statements to kind of, and as part of that, looking at ways to reduce embodied carbon emissions on projects. And the major development should also calculate their whole life cycle carbon emissions in the first instance. And then as a stretching target, all developments should, regardless of size, should be measuring whole life carbon, and then major developments should be targeting 500 kilograms of CO2 per meter squared for their upfront embodied carbon emissions. All of this section on embodied carbon is quite, still, to be honest, quite new in the industry, especially for smaller developments. So we are kind of very conscious that there is quite a lot of kind of upskilling required to be able, in the industry generally, to be able to first of all measure embodied carbon and whole life carbon accurately, and then also to be able to reduce that in a way that is kind of meaningful and kind of consistent across the board. So there is a lot of flux in the industry about kind of how to do this and what targets should be. So definitely in this area, the targets that we're kind of looking at these and the recommendations we're giving are going to change kind of and improve over time. So this is really just kind of a space that we can just a kind of a starting point, I suppose, that kind of local authorities can start with and then kind of progress as time goes on. And then measuring in-use performance. So we think kind of as a minimum, projects should be using the principles of soft landings. And then kind of for kind of larger developments as a stretching target should be kind of putting fully in place a full soft landings procedure. And then also having a monitoring regime in place to cover, well, 20% of dwellings and 90% of common areas for the first 5 years. And what that really is seeking to do is to close that performance gap between design and operation to ensure that buildings are performing as they are intended during the design stages. And then low carbon energy supply. So kind of minimum requirement really is that we should have no on-site combustion and renewables should be assessed for viability. Where kind of it's available, so on southeast and south facing roofs, 40% of that should be kind of have a PV installation, unless there are kind of other specific kind of reasons why that can be shown to be unviable. And large developments should consider energy networks and should prioritize non-combustible heat sources for those. And then for the stretching target, this complements our reducing energy demands kind of recommendations, which was to measure the energy use intensity and achieve that total EUI of 70. And really this stretching target kind of complements that in the sense that that demand that you've measured of your building should then be matched by renewable energy storage and kind of smart controls to basically ensure that that energy is being provided by low carbon sources. And then finally, kind of once kind of all those other areas in terms of kind of reducing energy demand and kind of the use of renewable energy have kind of been considered, there is also zero carbon balance addressing residual emissions, which is kind of also kind of referred to as offsetting, basically. And really, as a minimum, there should be a financial contribution made to get to net zero carbon for regulated emissions, which is kind of more, takes the kind of more traditional approach to offsetting in the past. Then for the stretching target, that offsetting should be made for regulated and unregulated emissions, and for major developments also to include a payment for the residual upfront embodied carbon as well. But again, those stretching requirements are designed to complement our other stretching targets around low carbon energy demand and reducing embodied carbon. So they're kind of things that should all be kind of taken together. but that's kind of in terms of the amount that we are recommending to be paid, that really does depend on the regional precedents and kind of what the specific local authorities are kind of looking to do. So we haven't kind of provided recommendations for that, but just a kind of framework on how that should be implemented, I suppose. And that's it, actually, guys. So that's, yeah, so I mean, that was just kind of a really quick summary of the key recommendations, but like I said, the full playbook is available on our website, and yeah, happy to have any questions on any of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I don't know if anybody's got any questions immediately now. I can't see any in the Q&A button, but if anybody wants to whiz something in there or in the chat, or save them up for the end. We're not getting anybody quite there yet. So, well, oh no, we have. How will you, yes, here we are. How will you deal with the overheating issue?
So I mean, in terms of dealing with it, we've kind of got we're doing a separate kind of study onto overheating. Overheating is certainly an issue, especially when you're looking at kind of putting in tighter energy efficiency and kind of fabric standards, for sure. But as part of this, especially kind of in the kind of monitoring regime that were mentioned in the reducing energy, kind of improving operational energy use section, that we're also recommendation that monitoring covers indoor air quality and also overheating risk. So that kind of monitoring over 5 years will cover energy use, air quality and overheating, just to check, again, like energy, that there aren't any kind of unintended consequences of the measures that are being put in, so they can be addressed. But generally, we as a general rule, like when you're looking at improving your kind of energy efficiency and building fabric, going through that more detailed modelling process that we kind of recommend would generally include, and we do recommend including, kind of overheating risk assessments in that, to make sure that every kind of element there is kind of addressed at the same time.
Thank you very much, Catherine. And I suppose from my point of view, I think I know the answer, but I'll just check that I've got it right. How are there some good methodologies for measuring energy use at the moment, or what do you recommend? Are there some standard?
So yeah, I mean, the kind of, there's, to be honest, there's loads of detail on it in specific in kind of the whole paper, but in terms of how we're kind of recommending measuring data, so we're mentioning there, we are kind of recommending moving towards the use of energy use intensity rather than the Part L method, kind of looking at carbon emissions, using the Part L methodology. To measure energy use intensity, we are generally recommending either using the CIBSE TM54 methodology for operational energy use, or using PHPP passive house methodology. And we really think that those kind of two options give the most have the kind of the most thorough understanding and the most accurate representation of operational energy, because there's a huge thing about the Part L methodology is kind of has its place, but it doesn't reflect very well energy use on the ground during operation, and there is that performance gap that we find a lot at the moment, and hopefully moving towards these new methodologies are kind of, we'll hopefully see that close.
Great, thank you very much. I'm sure there'll be more questions that people think about during our next speaker, but at this point, I'd love to hand over to Lucy to give us her presentation. Thank you very much, Catherine.
Thank you very much, Mary and Emily, for inviting me. And sorry, I've got a very, very sensitive mouse, by the way, so it'll jump around a bit. I think, Catherine, your presentation was really interesting. I really like the kind of minimum standards and the stretching standards, because that gives people a kind of steps. You know, you're not just asking them to get to an unachievable level right immediately, but you're giving them some steps. So I really like that. And just to address the overheating question, I think there's a huge amount that people in the planning departments can help to affect better design, because as an architect, overheating is something that you have to look at right at the very beginning, so that the house or the building doesn't overheat to begin with, rather than adding in air conditioners or shading and so on afterwards. So a lot of it's to do with design in terms of overheating. Catherine's talked about mainly new buildings, and Mary had said at the beginning that SWPA looks at both new build and retrofit, and my presentation is about retrofit. So as I've mentioned, I'm an architect. I'm the director of the Green Register. We're in our 21st year. We're a not-for-profit training organisation. We've been providing unbiased training for the last 2 decades. And I'm going to specifically be talking about a project called Future-Proof. So Future-Proof is a project to train builders, because it's absolutely fine for us as architects and engineers to understand how to comply with building regs or exceed building regs. But if the guys on the ground don't understand the principles and don't understand the installation methods, then you've already lost the battle there. So we're trying to train builders to understand the principles of sustainable construction. It's a joint project between us, the Green Register, and the Centre for Sustainable Energy here in Bristol, which is basically an energy advice centre. And they've been going for at least as long as we have. And what we're trying to do as a combination is to balance the supply and demand. So we are supplying trained, skilled builders in sustainable retrofit. And CSE, they already actually have the demand. So they've got probably many more people wanting to look for builders than there are builders skilled in this area. But they want to give some confidence to the people who call them up that there is a pool of builders who can deliver what they're after. So generally speaking, although CSE does cover fuel poverty issues, the kind of inquiries they get tend to be able to pay people who want to improve their house, are willing to pay, just can't find the builders. So when you put those two together, what you get is better retrofit and better buildings. The Green Register had actually started this work prior to Future-Proof. So Future-Proof is a BEIS funded project. There's 6 pilot projects around the UK. We got some funding for the Southwest. We're based in Bristol, although the Green Register is a national organisation. And before retrofit came up, we were looking at how to include builders, because it's really easy for us to attract construction professionals such as surveyors, architects, builders and so on. I've been trying to get builders and contractors in our meetings and our events for 20 years, and it's extremely difficult. So we got some food and drink together, and we invited some builders to sort of discuss this idea, presented them with some ideas, different types of formats, what time of day, what the content would be, and then asked them to identify the barriers to attending training. We kind of knew what we thought it would be, but we wanted to ask the builders why they weren't joining us. And we came up with 5 main reasons why contractors aren't getting skilled up, and I'll go through each of those now. The first of which is a lot of the builders were saying, well, I'd quite like to attend some of your training, but nobody will pay me if I go off site and attend your training. So if we were able to hold it on site, possibly some employers would allow them to attend. But we were looking at sort of events at the end of the day, toolbox talks on site, practical training formats. But we realised that actually the key to unlocking this was to start to pay people. So the first thing we did, we started to pay builders to offer Future-Proof sites so we could look at best practice. But by May 2019, we actually started to offer builders to attend our sessions, and that really unlocked it, unsurprisingly. Not very much, but it was just enough to counter what they might lose by being off site. The next 2 barriers was that there's no real incentive to learn about sustainable building. Nobody's particularly asking them to. Building control officers have too much to do, they're under-resourced, they can't insist on compliance because they have the competitive situation with approved inspectors. But one of the things that was interesting that came out of our exploratory meetings was they did actually want to be part of a group of knowledgeable, committed builders. Rather than seeing each other as adversarials, they wanted to share ideas and so on. And that's proved to be an extremely positive success story as part of Futureproof. So we looked at this in a different way, and we wanted to try and appeal to builders to the pride in their work. You know, most people want to get to the end of the day and actually be proud of what they're doing, builders included. And certainly the builders that we're working on Futureproof, they want to do a good job. We wanted to offer a ready-made customer base to these builders who committed to the training, who want average above average building quality, so that once they've trained, they've got a ready-made customer base. And we wanted to give builders confidence to know how to respond to some of the client inquiries. Some of them were telling us that they were a bit unsure or unconfident about some of the technologies or some of the installation measures. And also to appeal to the idea is that this is the way we're going, both with retrofit and new build, so don't get left behind. We wanted to design the training to suit their needs in terms of content, format and timing, and to present an opportunity to share ideas and networks. I'll come back to what we've done then. So the fourth one, which I've already alluded to, the fourth barrier is that we do have this competitive situation where what we hear from local authority building control officers is that it's very hard for them to insist on compliance because they have the competition of approved inspectors. Therefore, poor quality work isn't identified, non-compliant projects so-called pass the regs, and Catherine was talking about the performance gap. One of the many issues with the performance gap is inadequate workmanship on site and not being picked up on site due to restrictions in resources for the building control. We've had local building control attend our networking event. We've trained other building control officers. We see this as a key bit in the puzzle to improving quality of building. The last one was that some of the builders were telling us, well, you know, I could attend your training, but what's it going to give me? What's it going to show to others that I've attended this? And we did some work with the FMB, the Federation of Master Builders, Licensed to Build, because they did a really good piece of work back in 2018 to ask their builders whether, or ask their members, whether they thought a license would be a good way to go. So we wanted to investigate this, and we talked to the FMB to see whether we could work with them on this. 77% of members said they wanted a licensing scheme of some sort. This is the report that was done, and obviously the 77% response shows there's a real appetite. And what we found talking to our builders and contractors, also reading this, is that what they wanted to do is to disassociate themselves with the cowboy builders, the road traders, all of this thing that sort of tars them all with the same brush, because there are many, many good builders out there. And the kind of words they wanted to use were quality, trust, respect, and so on. So we started to work this Futureproof training around the fact that we would then present these builders with these qualities. The first thing we did was to just get people together, start some networking, generate some interest and so on. We had a big meeting together with a pie and a pint. This is me showing my own house. We had on-site demonstrations, small gatherings, larger conferences, just to talk about where we should go with this idea. And then we started to develop the actual training. One of the really rewarding things that's come out of Futureproof is that builders just don't want to know how to do things, they want to know why. So for example, these two slides show the morning where we were showing how to, all the background about air tightness, and in the afternoon we were demonstrating some of the practical skills that builders needed. I'm just going to try and shut the window actually, hang on a second. Sorry, a bit of background noise. So that was really encouraging to us. The builders and contractors really wanted to know about the theory. So our sessions are both practical and theoretical. But we also realised that it's more than just training the builders. Builders interact with other people, and this is some of the list of the things that places and organisations that we are working with, local authorities being one in particular. Builders merchants, of course, builders go to builders merchants. So we've been working with Kellaway here in Bristol because we need everybody to come on board with this, not just to train the builders and then they found they've got barriers themselves. So back at the end of 2019, we'd made quite a lot of inroads, and these are some of the subjects that we were training our builders on. And we realised that beyond just training the builders, we then wanted to pass that information on to other builders. So we created something called the Toolbox Talks. And this was the idea that we would train the builders and then they would go out themselves and offer advice on site to builders who perhaps didn't know very much about sustainable building. And the way we've done this is, if you look at the colours of the hard hats, the ones in green are the ones that are most knowledgeable, and then amber and yellow are the ones that probably don't know a great deal. So find some builders that want to learn, skill them up, more green hats, and then invite builders from the general sort of populace to come along and to ask our trained builders for one-to-one advice. So our builders would go onto site, give them specific advice about maybe something in particular like air tightness, or maybe general advice about sustainability. We realised that some of these builders wouldn't take on board anything that they'd learned from the Toolbox Talk. That's fine, that's the reality. Some would take on board some of the training and advice that was given, but most importantly for us, what we wanted to do is for some of those builders that had been trained on the Toolbox Talks to come into the fold, if you like, to increase the pool of trained, knowledgeable builders. We call these builders FABs, future-proof associated builders, but it's also because they are FAB. They are really committed builders trying to make a difference. So that was the idea, that there'd be an ever-increasing pool of trained, knowledgeable builders through the Toolbox Talks. Just to give you an idea of some of the sort of subjects that the Toolbox Talks were going to be delivering. So positioning of windows, for example, this is from a great suite of guides that you can find free of charge on the Buildings Hub, which is the legacy of the Zero Carbon Hub website. Incidentally, they have a lot of guides there on overheating, and just very straightforward things like where to put the window in relation to the insulation. Very simple thing to avoid, and then this is how you solve it. You just align it with the insulation. And we back that up with practical applications. So again, this is going back to my house and the problems we had with positioning the windows relative to the insulation, and using these guides that I've just referred to. They really are an excellent suite. They're all free to give to builders to be able to look at best practice. So by the end of 2019 and early 20, what we had got was a resource section on the Futureproof website. One of the things that the builders said to us many, many times is, can you explain some of the terms? We don't understand the jargon. So I wrote a glossary of terms, which is jargon free, which just gives everybody an understanding of some of the key phrases and topics that are often talked about. We've got this interactive house on the website. There's one for homeowners, for CSE clients. There's one for builders. Very similar information, to be honest. We've got the CSE fact sheets, which have been written a long time ago, which are very clear, very good, informative guides, adding some more technical information like the zero carbon guides and so on, and videos and so on. And then this picture you can see is just some of our FABs. We had a celebration and awards for those who'd gone through the initial training. We were poised to scale this all up as a result of the success of the initial Futureproof work. This is just from CSE showing you sort of quite how we needed to scale up. So this is showing various measures here. This is in Bristol. This is the current situation, so less than 200 heat pumps. If we're to achieve the Bristol 2030 net zero carbon in 8.5 years, we'd have to install 96,000 heat pumps, as an example. We alone weren't going to be doing that, but we were part of the solution. and then we were visited by Invisible Killer. So we at the Green Register had to rapidly sink or swim. I'm pleased to say that there's a very clear silver lining to that particular cloud for us. We converted everything to online training. And one of the things that we were particularly surprised about is we would have a poll at the end of each of our online sessions for builders to say, what do you think? Do you like online training? Would you prefer to have face-to-face? And consistency throughout the last 14 months, everybody said they like online training. It's not to say we won't go back to face-to-face, because we do need to be able to demonstrate best practice on site, even though we've embedded a lot of live videos and so on in our training. But we were pleasantly surprised that people had sort of come on board with online training. So we've got an ongoing rolling programme of training our FABs. We've got over 80 registered to date. The actual funding's come into an end from BEIS. So at the Green Register, we're trying to work out ways to convert this into a paid for service, which is sort of in progress at the moment. We've designed a learning management system which makes it much easier for builders to be able to see where they are with the learning programs, see what events they've already attended, and manage their own training sessions. And where we are now with the Green Register is that we are looking at blended learning. So that's partly face-to-face, that's partly online, but it is also pre-recorded sessions. So we're continuing to do our online interactive training sessions. I did the one last night on best practice ventilation, where we have some case studies. We have a lot of interaction between the speakers. People can ask questions and so on. One of the really interesting things that's come out of Futureproof, though, is something that we are very confident is going to be useful across the board, from local authorities to builders to architects to anybody who wants to find a way of gathering the main sort of foundation, if you like, for the principles of sustainable construction and retrofit. And this is called Essentials. This is 10 pre-recorded sessions from all our best core trainers of the Green Register on all the key aspects of sustainability. And it's a paid for service. It's fairly inexpensive though, and you can learn at your own time. So once you've signed up, you and your colleagues can learn after work, whenever you like. We've had quite a big take up of that, but we're pleased that it's sort of appropriate across various groups. The final thing that we did, which is coming to an end, which is connected to the Green Homes Grant, which most of you will know has been, shall we say, less than completely successful. But one of the things we identified with the Green Homes Grant, and was very clear from the beginning when it was introduced last September, was there weren't enough installers to deliver the work. So there was a pent-up demand from homeowners to get the grant, the £5,000 or £10,000, but they had to use somebody who was Trustmark and PAS 2030 certified, and there weren't enough of those. So we worked with some partners to create a package which was a discounted scheme to get the basic training under Essentials, but also get Trustmark and PAS 2030 certification. So it was £1,700 as opposed to £4,000 to get through that certification. We know that builders aren't paperwork people. They didn't want to have to do this, but without getting this Trustmark and PAS 2030, it couldn't access the Green Homes Grant projects, but they also can't attract some of the other government funded work like ECO and so on. So that's been a bit slow because of the negative press on the Green Homes Grant. What we're now doing is to try and offer this to unemployed builders to address the green skills and employability of some of the smaller builders. So we're getting some traction there. So I never do a presentation without my two heroes here on the screen, Greta Thunberg and David Attenborough. But thank you very much. I hope that there is a bit of feedback or questions here. I'm happy to answer questions from now on. Thank you.
Hang I'm on mute. I'm on mute. Thank you very much, Lucy. There is another question coming up there in the chat. I don't know whether you can see it. It says, are you covering the issue of the LAD delivery and the insistence where contractors need to be Trustmark accredited to deliver to PAS 35? I understand contractors are unhappy in investing further after the MSC accreditation.
Thanks, Mary. And that's a question for Michael. Yes, we are, is the answer to that. We're working with CSE, with local authorities out in the Southwest. I mean, we're not really limited to the Southwest anymore. We were when we were funded, but actually we can offer this around the country. But CSE is working with local authorities with the LADS delivery. Yes.
Any other questions either on? Oh, there's one in the question box. Oops, right, I'm being reminded from Clinton. There's a lot of focus on delivery capability. However, is there currently any liaison with key product manufacturers to ensure future product supply can meet anticipated future demand? I don't know whether that's a question for either Catherine or Lucy, or maybe both of you would like to answer that.
Sure, I'll start. So if anybody's actually doing any building work at the moment, you'll know that post-lockdown, the demand for materials has been off the scale. Shortage of supplies, increase in prices and so on, and certainly the product manufacturers that we're working with are finding it very difficult to keep up. I mean, the product manufacturers we work with are the ones that are offering the low carbon, low impact building materials. So they're fairly niche anyway, but I think the problem is across the board. You know, Brexit hasn't helped in terms of, you know, the tariffs and so on. So it's a tricky situation for anybody building at the moment in the UK. I mean, I think it's temporary. I think it will even out once the demand has sort of flattened a little bit.
You want to any response from you, Catherine, on that point?
No, I think that's great. I think Lucy's covered it. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions, topics? Is everybody clear about how they can get hold of some of the very useful resources that Lucy's put there? Just to remind you all, we will be sending out copies of the presentations, and that it will be put on the YouTube as well. But I don't know whether anybody else has got any questions or comments in the chat. I can see everybody's still there waiting for questions and comments. Or maybe Catherine or Lucy, you've got questions for each other at the moment. I'm just
Well, I would just like to encourage local authorities to take advantage of some of the training. You know, once you understand the issues, one of those major barriers has been removed. So if you're training up builders and architects to do better buildings, what you want is your staff also to understand the issues. You know, as an architect in the past, we've had some very significant barriers when talking to building control and planning, but that's primarily because they don't understand it. It's not that they're basically against it. It's just, you know, if you don't understand things or not familiar with it, you sort of tend to have a knee-jerk reaction of no. So I would really encourage people, I mean, not just our training, obviously, but the essentials is it's a nice little package to get people started.
I'd agree with Lucy there, actually. We definitely find that, and to be honest, that's one of the reasons why we've kind of done a lot of work on these policy playbooks for local authorities, is that especially a lot of the sustainability kind of topics are very technical. Especially around kind of the reducing energy demand and moving to different methodologies. That's a whole new area of expertise that kind of, you know, planning officers and local authorities won't necessarily kind of have any experience in dealing with. So definitely kind of engaging with local authorities and kind of helping to upskill those officers in understanding those topics is really important, and we do try and engage with them as much as possible at the moment to make sure that these are understood.
I mean, I'll give you an example. I'm working with some fellow architects in Bristol, and there's a conservation officer who has deemed that even slimline double glazed units are inappropriate in older buildings, even when the window is not the original window. You know, that's a backward step. That's 20th century thinking. And if planners were able to understand the issues around this, they may be able to fight against this kind of very narrow view of things. So I think in that particular situation, you've got local authorities signing up to a climate challenge, and actually people in the local authorities resisting that, making decisions that are actually counter to the local authority trying to achieve that.
I think we've had a question in the chat from Michael again. Could you extend this training to social housing providers as well?
Oh, absolutely.
Do you?
We would. The training is not limited to anybody, Michael. Particularly the essentials, as I keep going on about. You know, that's for everybody. For social housing providers, we'd absolutely love to talk to you if that's where you are. It's for everybody.
And I think you know, the training and the practical hands-on is so important for the smaller builders, whom obviously, in terms of supporting local economies, you know, we're all very keen on in the Southwest. So providing training and practical advice and guidance, particularly for those maybe starting up, or as you say, are having a hard time of it in the current climate, although I believe everybody is getting their homes refurbed at the moment. So most builders are very busy.
I have a question for Catherine. Is that okay to ask?
Yes.
So I was really interested in the embodied energy or body carbon, whichever we use, because of course energy in use or predicted energy is easy to measure. It's kilowatt hours per square meter, or however metric we use. You know, I started working in embodied energy 30 years ago, and we're still not at a point where there's a universal methodology for measuring it, let alone any legislation or standards, apart from perhaps BREEAM materials credits, that addresses this. And that's because it's such an incredibly complicated issue. You know, where do you draw the line in terms of where what you're including and what you're not including in the whole life carbon? And we're getting somewhere, but I just wondered, you know, what do you think, how far are we away of having some kind of universally accepted methodology that you know, planners and building control could adopt?
I definitely think, yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there is still a lot of kind of, and there's so many different acronyms. There's kind of embodied carbon, whole life carbon, upfront embodied carbon. I mean, there's just so many different things that mean slightly different things. And in terms of kind of methodologies and kind of a standardized system, I definitely think that the industry is kind of coming to just generally agree. There's the kind of the RICS whole life carbon guidance and framework is really where the industry is kind of focusing on using that as the key framework. So us at UKGBC, we reference that that as a kind of the key methodology to look at, and the same with the RIBA and LETI, who are kind of the other kind of key kind of industry players, I suppose, that are kind of looking at embodied and whole life carbon and looking to set targets and recommendations. That is really the methodology that kind of people are using that to kind of underpin these targets. So I think the methodology for whole life carbon is kind of there in terms of what everyone's using. I suppose I think that the area that still needs improvement and kind of more needs more work is really about what the targets are and kind of how those targets are set, because we know we have a kind of a generally accepted consensus on how to measure whole life carbon and what to include and what not to include, but there isn't yet the kind of solid evidence base in industry about what is a reasonable kind of target for whole life carbon, what is like best practice and what is kind of poor practice, and where you should really look at. And actually LETI kind of released some really useful kind of guidance earlier this week, I think, about kind of embodied carbon targets, so that, and you know, LETI, RIBA and us, we're kind of all working together to kind of make sure that all of our kind of targets are kind of aligned, is kind of like the idea. Obviously it doesn't help when everyone's kind of saying you're meant to do different things, so we are kind of aware that everything needs to be aligned, but I think we're not that far off. I don't think having a kind of a consensus around where we need to get to in terms of targets, but it is definitely in progress. It's really just having that evidence base once we've, in the next year or two, once we have that evidence from buildings on the ground that have already measured and we can collate that data, then there's going to be a much better baseline for comparison.
Absolutely, yeah, and we did some work with the RIBA Southwest last year. They've got something called the Climate Challenge, 2030 Climate Challenge, and I'm sure you'll know about this, but Catherine, but for others, there's 4 metrics. There's health and well-being, operational energy, embodied energy, and potable water, and they do have targets. So they have an interim target of 20 to 35. And then they have their target of 2030 for each of those 4 metrics. And so they, you know, for those who are interested, you can have a look at that to see what targets they've used for embodied energy. And again, it's a stepped situation. So it's not just don't get to 2029 and panic because you haven't got to your 2030 targets. Here's an interim practical measure. It's a bit like UK GBC sort of minimum standards and stretching standards, is that by 2035 you've got the minimum standards done, and by 2030 you've got the stretching standards.
Thank you so much. Yes, I think different measurement criteria and what is there, you know, because if you say to somebody, what is a zero, give me a zero carbon home, and people say, well, what do you mean? And then you realize that there are millions of different definitions, and I think everybody, well, certainly we would like to see some standard forms of measurement. What I meant to say was, you know, we do a number of knowledge sharing events. So if participants want to sort of put in the chat what else they'd like to see us do some knowledge sharing events, either around zero carbon or around other topics, then please do, and we'll arrange, set up you know, things that people might want to listen to, just take a quick hour out of their busy working days. But yes, there's certainly many more potential sessions around the subjects we've been talking about today. I don't know if you want to, we're coming up to the end of the hour. I don't know whether anybody wants to say. There is a question in the Q&A.
I'm saying I can just answer that quickly for Nick.
Yes.
So yeah, that's about Nick's just saying one of their schemes is trying to achieve zero carbon of a fabulous fisheries target of 39, and so on our energy use intensity recommendations, we're recommending in that stretch a kind of a total EUI of 70, and then kind of for specifically for heating demand 15 to 20. And Nick, what I without obviously haven't been able to go into too much detail here, are one of the documents I referenced in my presentation was our kind of feasibility study into achieving net zero carbon buildings, and I'd really recommend giving that a read. I can definitely send a link around kind of when we kind of go through send around the presentations after this. And basically what we've done in that study is we have, that's really where our recommendations has come from, because we did this study and then we took a kind of a building that has been fully designed and then looked at what different measures needed to be included to get that target down, and how to kind of get those to that 70 or below kind of targets. So that included things like definitely moving away from boilers and putting in air source heat pumps, and just improved kind of insulation properties. So all the kind of technical details in that report. So I definitely recommend giving that a read. It should hopefully give you some more detail about what would need to be done for that.
Great. Well, thanks very much. Thanks to everybody who's listened, attended. Special thanks to Lucy and Catherine, who have given up valuable time to give some really interesting, useful presentations. We will be sending around the notes, and I'm sure both Lucy and Catherine will be happy to take on any questions if you want to address them either directly to them or via us. But they've given such very good long lists of resources. So I think it's for all of us, it's more research, more thinking, and more keeping an eye on things as developed. So with that, I'll sign off. and sign us all off, I think.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.